All right, let's get back into Leviticus 23. Short recap. We were talking about the rapture and how the Feast of Trumpets kind of is pointing us to that. As we know, you've got some of the sheets I gave out. God has followed all the feasts he set up for Israel. Jesus' return fulfilled 4 of those feasts, and then we've got 3 more feasts coming. The next of these to be the Feast of Trumpets. And so I hear a lot of people talking about different aspects of when they think it is, and part of the reason this study is here is because I believe we can prove biblically one way or another. I don't think it's one of those things we really have to debate about a whole lot, but I'm sure there'll be a lot of debate about that too. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. I'm just going to show you what we've got. So we started with my one little sneaky verse that I found that talks about us being the leftovers around the fields. And that how God, even in a prophetic book like this, made plans for us, which I think is wonderful. Then we talked about the commands concerning the feast and the 4 times trumpets blown. And I told you it was going to be a test. All right, who remembers the 4? No, I'm just kidding. My wife's raising her hand back here in the back. So. The first of the 4 was assembling the whole congregation together. Yeah, I gave her the notes this morning. No, I'm just kidding. So assembling the whole congregation together, setting out to a new destination, at times of rejoicing at the appointed feast and festival, and when battle or war was about to begin. And again, if you listen to all 4 of those, it really sounds like what's going to happen to us at the beginning of the Feast of Trumpets. So we talked about the days of awe. You've got your little chart that shows the days of awe and how prophetic fulfillment's in there. And then I went into some of these wonderful names that talk about the Jewish names and themes through the Feast of Trumpets. One was Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Teruah, the last trump, Yom Zikaron, and Yom Hadin was the last one, which was the Day of Judgment, was the last one that we went through before we broke off. Now we're going to be talking today about Yom Hamelech. So in Yom Hamelech, this is a day of coronation of the king, is what this day is supposed to be. It's what it's talking about. So again, when I'm talking about these, keep in mind, always keep your mind on the fact I'm talking about the Feast of Trumpets when the King of Kings comes back to take us away, right? When he calls us up and we'll meet him in the air. So when you look at these Jewish names and these Jewish types and foreshadows of this day that's coming, remember, we're trying to relate how these relate to that time, the Feast of Trumpets, or the time of the return of rapture. So you got Yom Hamelech and the day of coronation of king. This feast was also associated with the day of the coronation of the king. For example, we read the following about the coronation of King Solomon. 1 Kings 1:39 says, Zadok, the priest, then took the horn of oil from the tent and anointed Solomon. They blew the trumpet, and the people said, Long live King Solomon. So you see, trumpets, we're talking about the blowing of trumpets and how they relate to events in Jewish culture is what we're talking about here. So you look at the fulfillment of this scripture, and it's Jesus is the coming king, right? Makes pretty easy sense. This process starts at the rapture, where he's established as the king of earth. Revelation, with the breaking of each seal, depicts the process of the king taking back his kingdom, having established himself as the one and only who has rights to this world in Revelation. He is the one that has been given the decree to reign. So we understand right now that Satan has control, right, over this earth. And not only during Revelation, when we studied this a while back, not only is Revelation judgment on Israel, it's judgment on the earth too. The earth is put through a series of devastating things that will happen to it, and all of these relate to God's judgment on the earth, the same as he judges Israel. Now, those devastating things on the earth also affect Israel, of course, and the world. But again, we're talking about judgments because even though God is God and he's in control of everything, Satan is in control of the earth, at this point. And so God will take that back. Jesus will. And so that's what it's talking about here. Psalms 2, 7 through 8 says, I will proclaim the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. And we remember, I mean, even when Satan tempted Christ, right? What did he say? I will give you all this. So evidently Satan's got some authority and power, right? Even though Jesus, ultimately, God, has authority and power, Satan's been given it for a time period. And until this day, God takes it all back. And then over a 7-year process, he really shows that he is the Lord and that you can't live without him, basically, is what we go through. So this process of judging and retaking the Lord will carry on through the 7 years, and until he returns with the name, or this name on his robe, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Revelation 19:6. It's quite likely that the 7th trumpet, which announces that the kingdom of this world have become the kingdom of our Christ, will also fall in that final year and period. Now, we talk about the Feast of Trumpets. It's over a few day period, and you've got multiple horn blasts that go through that. And so the last horn blast in Revelation, some people relate that to the last horn blast. I can't prove that really documented. It's a theory, but I like to tell you when it's a theory. But a lot of people kind of relate those two together. So that's Yom HaMelech. Now, Yom HaKashi. I love these names. The hidden day. In Jewish thought, this feast was also the hidden day. It was also, or it was said to be hidden from Satan. Now, this is interesting. I didn't realize this till I started studying this. It was hidden because they didn't know exactly what day it would begin due to the fact that they first had to sight the smallest part of the new moon. So when they first sighted that smallest part of the new moon, that's when this feast would begin. And so they called it the hidden day because they didn't even know for sure when it was going to happen. So they called it that because they said, well, if we don't know, Satan doesn't know. So they called it the hidden day, like it was hidden from Satan. So they actually had this 2-day period in the Feast of Trumpets. You'll see on that little chart I gave you on the days of awe and everything when it's on there, you've got 2 days at the beginning. And the reason they had those 2 days is because they weren't exactly sure when they would sight the new moon. And so instead of taking a chance of saying it's always right here, they gave themselves a 2-day period so that they'd have a little leeway. So they call it the hidden day. Like Rosh Hashanah, the Jews would typically say, of that day and hour no one knows. And so even the Jews had that thought process. They just weren't sure. They knew pretty close, but they weren't exactly sure back then or when it was happening. So when we look at the Feast of Trumpets coming for us, which is the rapture, what does the Bible say? No man knows. So not even the angels know. So that's where you see these two kind of fulfilled together. Matthew 24, 32 through 36 says, now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. And then 36 right here. No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. So while Gentiles read this to mean that no one knows when he will return, the Jewish mind would see Jesus alluding to the Feast of Trumpets. So even when this was being said in Matthew, the Jews were going, oh, he's talking about the Feast of Trumpets. We all now look at it and say, well, he's talking about the return of Christ. But in their minds, Christ hadn't come, right? They haven't accepted Christ. So they thought he was talking about the Feast of Trumpets, and it made sense to them because they said, we really don't know that day or hour. So that's what it was talking about here. So there's also strong thought of the believers being hidden at this time. This comes across in several passages. One related passage in Psalms 27, this psalm is read every day during the 40-day period leading up to the Day of Atonement, which includes the Feast of Trumpets. Part of the Psalms is speaking of the hiding of believers. So Psalms 27:5 says this, "For in the day of trouble he will conceal me in his tabernacle. In the secret place of his tent he will hide me. He will lift me up on a rock." Zephaniah 2:2-3 says, "Before the decree takes effect, the day passes like chaff. Before the burning anger of the Lord comes upon you." What's the burning anger of the Lord during, that's that 7-year period, right? "Before the burning anger of the Lord comes on you, before the day of the Lord's anger comes upon you, seek the Lord, all you humble of the earth who have carried out his ordinances. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger." So there's a lot of verses that kind of point to this. Now, we can take verses out of context and make them sound like anything we want. When I was studying this, I went back and kind of looked at these verses, and I like how they kind of relate to that hidden, that talking about this. Can I actually tie them to that? No, but I thought it was interesting to see these. So just wanted to say that before we go on. Isaiah is another one. It says this next passage is fantastic, for it ties to the resurrection in with the hiding of people. So Isaiah 26:19-21 says, "Your dead will live, their corpses will rise. You will lie in the dust, awake and shout for joy. For your dew is as the dew of the dawn, and the earth will give birth to the departed spirits." You start to hear where this sounds like. "Come, my people, enter into your rooms and close your doors behind you. Hide for a little while until indignation runs its course. For behold, the Lord is about to come from his place to punish the inhabitants of earth for their iniquity, and the earth will reveal her bloodshed and will no longer cover the slain." So you see, a lot of these verses really sound like they're pointing to that. Now, whether they are or not, but it really sounds like that's what they're doing here. Is they're prophetic in their talking about God will hide us away and take care of us. Talking about the time that we leave for that period. So now let's look at the opening of the gates. The feast was also said to be the opening of the gates of heaven in Jewish thought. In contrast, the Day of Atonement was said to be the closing of the gates, after which there was no hope of salvation. So the fulfillment, again, when you look at this, is it's another description of the rapture. This is where the gates of heaven are opened, right? We're all going to be brought in, so the righteous may come in. As an interesting type, the rapture of John in Revelation 4 gives a direct parallel to what will happen on the day of the rapture of the church. It also involves heaven being open. Here's the passage. So in Revelation 4, 1-3, it says, "After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven, and the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, 'Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this.' At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian. A rainbow resembling an emerald encircled the throne." So the parallels here, let's look at those real quick. John looked and saw a door standing open in heaven, right? This is the gates that we talk about in the feast. Again, they thought when you had the Feast of Trumpets that the gates of heaven were open during that time. And so, again, we look at the Feast of Trumpets, and that's what we keep relaying to, which is what the next feast is going to be, which is the rapture. So the gates that are opened here is talking about that. John heard a voice like a trumpet. We know that that's what we're going to hear, right? All as the believers will hear at the rapture. 1 Thessalonians 4:16, 1 Corinthians 15:52, both talk about voice like a trumpet sound. You'll hear that at the time. So John heard the command to come up here. All right. This is likely to be a loud command at the Lord at his return. So John got to see what takes place after this. The church age represented by Revelations 2 and 3. At the rapture, the bride of Christ is taken to heaven, which is the close of the church age. So we've got the church age right now. That's us on the outsides of the fields. We're being harvested. The Gentiles are being brought in. Jews, hopefully, are being converted during this time as well. But at the end of this, that's the call up. That's where it says, come in, come up. And that's what it's talking about here. And again, we're talking about the Feast of Trumpets and how it relates to the rapture. The last thing here was John was immediately before the throne of heaven at the rapture. The Lord's promise is fulfilled where he said, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. In John 14:3 says that. So now we're going to look at the wedding of the Messiah. And I actually might get done. Oh yeah, I'm doing good today. Speaking too fast. All right. So the wedding of the Messiah. In Jewish thought, the Feast of Trumpets was tied to the wedding of the Messiah. The stages in Jewish marriage, and I tell you, and Justin, you've probably done this, Terry, I don't know if you have or not. When you start going back and studying Jewish tradition, Jewish customs, and how they kind of point to some of the things that are going on even now or what will happen, it just amazes me how things parallel so much. And so that's why I like doing these studies in Jewish customs. Stacy and I have been talking about actually getting a Jewish Seder together. If anybody would be interested in doing that, I don't know if you've ever done that or not. I think you guys have. You no, it's Janet and them that's done it. If you've ever been a part of a Jewish Seder, to where they actually do the meal, the Passover meal and everything, it's just so interesting. And it's amazing how everything has its place and purpose. And then you start to look at where we are and the things that are going to come, and you start to see, oh my goodness, look at the parallels to what he taught the Jewish people to do 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and how that still parallels what's going to happen to us in the coming times. So it's great to learn these things as we go through. So we're talking about trying to see about getting a Jewish Seder here, maybe before the end of the year, if we can get Jerry? Reggie. I don't know where that came from. Reggie, to come and do one. He's a Messianic Jew, so he's been saved, but he was born and raised a Jew. He's been saved now, so he goes and he does these things to show people all this. So it's really interesting. So anyway, we're talking about the wedding of the Messiah. In Jewish thought, the Feast of Trumpets was tied to the wedding of the Messiah. The stages in the Jewish marriage have a tremendous amount of significance for the believer who is part of the bride of the Lamb. Again, when you look at what the Jews talk about with their bride, we are that bride now. The church is that bride of Christ. So we need to look at the things that were taught there, because we kind of have similar things that we have to follow now. So all believers are currently betrothed to the Lord. He's gone away to prepare a place for us. He has promised to come again and take us to be where he is. In the Jewish wedding ceremony, the groom would come and take his bride into the wedding chamber until the marriage was consummated. Then they would emerge and celebrate for 7 days. That was just their Jewish custom. We look at the 7-year tribulation. What are we going to be doing as a church? We're going to be in heaven, having the marriage feast of the Lamb, right? We're going to be celebrating because Jesus has come and he's taken us back. We are now in that whole phase of that ceremony to where there's 7 days to where you'll be celebrating with Christ. Now, unfortunately, and I've thought about this, and I guess the human side of me at times kicks in, and I don't think about spiritual things, but I'm thinking we're going to be up there celebrating when this world is going through pure hell, literally hell on earth. And in my mind, it's hard for me to grasp that. Now, being there, yes, sir. Sure. Being there, we won't think about those things. However, my natural mind says, oh, that's going to be terrible for us to be living with Christ in glory, having a great time, and people I know possibly can still be on this earth suffering and going through this. It's terrible to think, but anyway, that's what they would celebrate for 7 days. So it shall be with Christ. He shall return for his bride prior to coming 7-year tribulation period on earth. Heaven is opened up in Revelation 4, where the trumpet is heard and the command is given to come up here. This is type of rapture. Heaven opens again at the second coming of Christ in chapter 19, where both Christ and his bride are pictured leaving heaven heaven with the wedding supper or feast having been announced. So Revelation 19, 7 through 9 says, "Let us rejoice and be glad and give him glory. For the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Fine linen, bright and clean, was given to her, or for her to wear. Linen stands for the righteous act of the saints. Then the angel said to me, Write this, Blessed are those who are invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb. And he added, These are the true words of God." Revelation 19, 11 through 17 says, "I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and makes war." We talk about when's the trumpet going to sound? One of them is war, right before war. Well, here we go. "The armies of heaven were following him, riding on a white horse and dressed with fine linen and white and clean. Out of his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepresses of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh he has the name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I saw an angel standing in the sun who cried in a loud voice to all the birds flying in midair, Come, gather together for the great supper of God." So let's look at now, we've done all this. And I wish it was all in one smooth message or lesson, but we'll run with what we've got. So let's look at a personal aspect. I always try to make this something that we're going to learn from it, or we're going to hopefully take away from this. So the personal aspect of the Feast of Trumpets are centered on the believer being watchful. Okay, it makes sense, right? We are to be ready. Just you think about, and I may be getting ahead of myself, but think about the women with oil, the virgins with oil. They had to be ready at all times, right? Didn't know when things were going to happen, so they had to be prepared. We as a believer need to be watchful. I have learned, the older I've gotten now, and back when I was younger, I may have said this before, may have even been last week. Another thing that goes when you get older is your memory. So, but 20 years ago, I was saved, but thinking about Christ coming back was always like, man, I hope that's later on because I got so much I want to do. And it seems like your focus is on family, on work, on personal enjoyment, whatever it is. Where I'm at now, I love my grandkids, I love my kids, I love my family, I love my church. But if he comes right now, I'm good. I'm ready to go. And I think that's where we need to be is, as Christians, we should long for that. And like Paul said, he has a strong desire to leave, but a need to stay. Just like I was talking with Jamie, and again, I may be repeating myself, but he's here for a reason, the gentleman that's passed away. I don't know how long he'll be here. God's going to take him when it's his time. So we need to be ready is what I'm getting at. Trumpets were used to alert the people of God. Because trumpets were also used in the battles that Israel fought, the personal aspect also speaks of spiritual warfare. Now you start looking at, we won't fight in the last battle, but we are in a spiritual warfare now stronger than I've ever seen in my life. And I tried to go back. As a kid, I was trying to think, were things as bad back then and I just didn't know it, because I didn't pay any attention as a kid. Are things worse now because we've got 24-hour news media streaming and we just see more than we saw 20, 30, 40 years ago? I honestly have to say no. I think we're living, now, is it Sodom and Gomorrah? No, it's not. I mean, it's very close. But when they're calling out people because they're tired of what they're doing with their own, and they're calling out strangers coming to land, give them to us so we can rape them. I mean, that's pretty bad. Are we there yet? No, but we're really, really close now. The Bible speaks about future events, or even a Revelation it talks about, in the end, good will be called evil, and evil will be called good. Man, we are there. Check that off the box. It's done. So we just need to be ready for a spiritual warfare that we're going on at all times. there are two aspects are related and are beginning to converge on our age. The attacks upon the believers are increasing. Everything that we call good and true, we heard something this week. I can't remember what it was. Stacey and I were talking about it, but it's to the point now to where everything that we believe, and if we stand up and say, wait a minute now, then the world calls us a ton of different names, says we're no longer, I don't know, well, bigots. It's not just that. We're not tolerant. Well, what about tolerance for what we believe? It seems like society does, they want you to accept them, but if you don't accept them, then they're not going to accept you either for your differences. So we live in a very difficult time. Spiritual warfare is increasing. Persecution on Christian believers is extremely common now, not just in the countries that we've always heard about them, right here in our own country. Stacey and I have been very blessed. We've been able to travel some, and I'm amazed at how much you look at Europe. Europe used to be a hub for spiritual belief. I mean, it may have been Catholic, but they had a strong spiritual belief for years. You go to Europe now, and you travel around in some of those countries that we've been to, religion's gone. I mean, Scotland, Ireland, I think over 80%, I know it's higher than that, but I want to be conservative here, of the religion is gone. People don't believe anymore. In the United States alone, back when I posted a little thing from the 50s yesterday, it got me in a lot of trouble. I was having fun, and that's all it was intended to be. But I sent out this little thing about women and their roles. Now, this was out of Good Housekeeping, and it was telling women what they were supposed to do for their husband when he came home from work. Yeah. So I read this off to my wife, and she was sitting over there with daggers staring at me as I was reading it. I was like, I'm just reading what it said, you know. So, yeah, we decided to send it to a few of the women family members, and I even sent it to Morgan. I said, here you go now, Caleb, and you'll get married. But anyway, it was all in fun. My mother-in-law didn't take it too much fun. I got several very nasty messages back from my mother-in-law, and I get a kick out of it because you look at, this was something that was published in a magazine in the 50s that they thought was normal. And we look at where we are now. Now, some of that was a little ridiculous. I'm not going to lie, but
a man wrote that.
Oh, I guarantee a man wrote it. There's no question. Oh, no. Actually, it does have a female's name as the author. Now, could have been a man writing as a female, but it does have it did have a female's. She was telling their place, and I like the last thing is a woman. One of the things was a woman always needs to know her place and trust that the man is always right, and that he's the head of the household, master of the household, and then a woman should know her place. And I was like, woo, this is going to be fun. So anyway, my point is things have changed from that time to now even. And we look at our society, I don't know that it's gotten any better. We are living longer. We're living healthier. We've got fineries. We've got a mobile computer we carry around in our pocket. I mean, when I was in high school, we didn't have computers. I mean, I remember the first ones coming. It's hard for me to say that out loud now, especially to my kids who have grown up with this stuff. And I'm like, no, I saw the first ones, you know? And so it's really, we didn't have the internet. Now everything's available on the internet. But along with that, persecutions have come stronger and stronger in the Christian faith. We need to be more and more prepared for those persecutions. We don't need to be confrontational. We have to stand up for what we believe, but there's a way of doing that without beating people down. And I've urged this many times in my class before. You can answer people's questions. If somebody's talking about whatever myriad of different beliefs are out there right now, when it comes to same-sex marriage, to abortion, there's dozens of things. We have to stand up for what we know to be God, what He said. But now we don't beat anybody down. If someone's had an abortion, I'm not going to judge you for that. I can't judge you based on the sins that I've committed in my own life. I don't want you throwing stones at me for those because I've made so many mistakes it's not even funny. So that's not our job, is to be judgmental. But we need to be firm in what we believe. And so that's what we're trying to do. It's happening here in this country more than it ever has happened before. So we need to watch and be ready, because it's just a matter of time. I feel like in our lifetime, I pray that the rapture happens. I do. I want my grandkids to grow up. I want them to drive a car. I want them to get married. I want them to have a healthy, happy life. But honestly, if we could get God on our side and let's do it tomorrow, I'd say let's go. Let's go. Matthew 24:12 says, because of this increase in wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. So because of what's going on in our society, it's exponential, the problems that we're going to see, meaning that what's happening bad right now is only going to get worse. People start to grow cold and indifferent because of the garbage they're seeing on the news and what they're seeing in their churches, and they keep seeing. We see what Jerry Falwell Jr. just went through, all this mess, and whether we consider him a Christian everybody makes mistakes, but that's what the world is seeing, and they're judging us based on that. So we have to be real cautious. So let's wrap this up and we'll be done. 4 reasons for the trumpets: assembling the whole congregation together, setting out to a new destination, at the time of rejoicing for the appointed feast, and then to sound the alarm when the battle is over. So hopefully through what all we've looked at, the different feasts, the different traditions in Jewish, you can see how all of those things point to the Feast of Trumpets and the rapture being at the beginning of that. Now, like I said, I'm not trying to sway you if you believe something different. I'm just showing you what I found in the scriptures, and it pretty much points to, I'm going to be out of here at the beginning of this. Any of these people who say we're going to be out mid-tribulation or post-tribulation, I can't see where they can find that at all biblically, but they do somehow. They've been doing this, debating this for a long time, but pretty confident I'm going to be out here on the first wave. So if you guys feel like it's going to be mid or whatever, I hope y'all have a good time, because I plan on being gone before then. But when the blowing of the heavenly trumpet will be a call for an entire true bride of Christ to assemble together. That place, according to 1 Thessalonians 4, will be in the air. And when I talk about the whole congregation, it says the whole congregation. That means everybody. Everybody's going to meet up there. God will not leave one true believer out of this, not even those that are already dead. That's a pretty big assembly if you think about it, in the air. That's going to be pretty amazing. But that is what the Lord will do. He will assemble the entire congregation together for the first time in history. Think about that. All the saints of old, Paul, Peter, Esau, all of these, Abraham, Isaac, guess what? We're going to meet them in the air. Even us. If it happened today, I'm going to be hanging out in the air with all of these saints of old right then and there. That's the congregation that's coming together. Man, what a day that's going to be. And we're all going to get to go to our new destination. And no, it's not Italy. It's not Hawaii. Those places are great. Trust me. But it's going to be heaven. And I mean, we think of paradise here on earth. It's not even going to come close to what we're eventually going to see. So we need to be looking for that. The prophet Joel said one thing here. He says in Joel 2:1-2, blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy hill. Let all who live in the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. It's close at hand, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness. Like dawn spreading across the mountains, a large and mighty army comes, such as was never of old, nor will be in ages to come. So it's going to be a day of rejoicing for us. It's going to be a day of tragedy for the rest of the world. We need to be out spreading the word as much as we can. I found, as I study some of these things now, the older I get especially, my urgency for telling people about God has changed. I was telling my wife, I was at work last week, and I try to separate, I was telling Terry, but I try to separate work from religion, and some people get offended, so I try not to offend. But if you open a door, now, that's your own fault. That's all I can say. And so I was at work last week, and I was talking to a gentleman, and I will say I had to ask forgiveness because I made a judgment on this guy that was incorrect. But as I was talking to him, he seemed like a good old country redneck kind of guy, and not very, just one of those that dressed, if you saw him, he just looked disheveled. It turns out this guy's a multimillionaire. And when I started hearing that, I was like, oh, okay. And then the next thing I know, he opens a little bit of a crack in the door about faith. And so I put my toe in the crack. And I thought, if he's going to open the door, I'll talk to him. Next thing I know, I'm just standing there with my mouth open in awe. This man takes his wealth. He makes about $4 million a year. Most of it goes back into the ministry. He's got drug rehab centers that he funds privately. He's going to seminary at night, 3 hours a day. He was an alcoholic that's been converted. He has given his life to the Lord. And man, when he started talking, I couldn't get a word in edgewise. He thought I opened the crack in the door. And so he was trying to run through on me. And so here me and him, we ended up having this whole 45-minute conversation about God, and just felt blessed to know him. But what I'm getting at is we need to find those cracks that we may not have found in the past. When you see those things, we need to try to get in there and spread the word of God, because time is short. I feel like it's just around the corner to where God's going to say enough. I don't know who that last soul is, but I know when that last soul that he's ready for is ready, then we're going to go on. Mm-hmm. And so I pray for that last soul. I pray he's sitting out here in this service today and he comes to know the Lord, and we can call this thing over. But again, be praying for the service. Be praying for Jonathan as he gets up there and preaches this morning. And it's Youth Sunday, so it should be an interesting day. Just pray that God has his way as usual. A lot of prayer requests, a lot of things going on with the church, so just keep those in mind too. So
we're going to meet with Jonathan?
Yeah, we need to do that still, so just don't let me forget. I've got to go get the laptop up and running and everything, but yeah, go ahead and do that. And let's grab him and go back and pray before I'm sure he needs it as much as anybody. So let's go ahead and be dismissed. Lord, we thank you so much for your love and your mercy, Lord. We thank you for this day. We thank you for just a place that we can come and worship, and that we can come together and lift you up, Lord. I pray today is the day, Lord. For somebody, today is the day. I pray that when we leave here, none of us will be like we were when we got here. Lord, I love you. I praise you. I ask all these things in your precious Son's name. Amen.